Good afternoon, everyone. I know we're still trying to find seats for some folks who are filtering in. So those of you who are part of this conversation and have yet to find a seat, we are bringing a few extras. There's one here as well. And we want to make sure that all of you have a chance. There's a place to observe from up on the balcony as well. It's great to see so many of you here for today's event, which is another in the Institute of Politics speaker series. I'm Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the IOP, and we're thrilled to have all of you with us for this very important and timely conversation featuring Russian pro-democracy leader, Human Rights Foundation Chairman, and chess Grandmaster Garry Kasparov. As many of you know, he has authored a new book. It's called Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. That book is available for purchase for those who are interested in reading it in detail and haven't already picked one up. Mr. Kasparov has also kindly agreed to sign copies of the book immediately after his talk and discussion. We want to extend our special thanks to our partners in today's event. They include the International House. This event is also part of their Global Voices program, and to the staff and team here. They're always great hosts, and we appreciate everything they're doing for us in making this possible. Special thanks as well to the Seminary Co-op Bookstore, which is partnering with us in providing books for today's event. We think it's fitting, actually, in many respects, to have a conversation about great power politics featuring a chess grandmaster, in part because I think, as so many of you know who are students of international relations, chess metaphors and chess terms are commonly used to describe the interests and actions of states, whether that be in the form of pawn or stalemate or endgame. And certainly Garry Kasparov has much to say about the current regime of Vladimir Putin and his impact on global affairs. We will take a pause after his remarks to get your questions in for him. We ask that when we do, that you make your question, in fact, a question, that you keep it short and to the point so that we can get to as many of you as possible. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Patrick Riley, a third-year student here at the college, to formally introduce Mr. Kasparov. Patrick hails from Wilmington, Delaware. He is a history major who is also the co-editor of The Gate, which is the student-run political journal affiliated with the Institute of Politics. It's my great pleasure to turn the microphone over to Patrick. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good afternoon. This year, one of the most popular topics for my fellow student journalists to cover has been the West's relationship with Russia. We are therefore very lucky to have Mr. Garry Kasparov, former world chess champion and current president of the Human Rights Foundation, here with us today to provide his unique perspective on this topic. Originally from Baku, Azerbaijan, Mr. Kasparov first won the Soviet Union's Junior Chess Championship in 1976 at the age of 13 and had claimed the title of World Chess Champion by the time he was 22. His chess career brought with it the opportunity to read and travel widely. In an interview last year, he recalled, quote, that he was probably one of the freest minds in the Soviet Union. Since retiring from competitive chess in 2005, Mr. Kasparov has worked tirelessly to advance democratic rights in Russia. In 2005, he founded the United Civil Front, which worked with a coalition called the Other Russia to reform the country's electoral system in advance of its 2008 election. This group selected Mr. Kasparov himself as its opposition candidate to run against Vladimir Putin for president. However, in 2007, Mr. Kasparov had to withdraw his candidacy, ostensibly because his party could not rent a meeting hall in time to make a filing deadline. Undeterred by this setback, Mr. Kasparov continues to advocate for democratic reforms and human rights in Russia. This experience guides his new book, Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Garry Kasparov.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. It was short and sweet. I'm always terrified to hear introductions because everybody looks at the Wikipedia, and I'm not sure whether they could find something that I never heard of. I can add a little spice to my biography, the place of birth. I always used to say that I was born and raised in the deep south right next to Georgia. which is perfectly correct. It was the deep south of the USSR, right next to the Republic of Georgia. Okay, the title of the book is "Winter is Coming," and why Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world must be stopped. And as you can guess, great part of the story is about Russia, about my country, and about Russian democracy. And I can tell you that Russian democracy has a longer losing streak than the Chicago Cubs. As on a more serious note, the book contains 3 stories in one. It's a rise and fall of the Russian democracy after the end of the Cold War. It's from Gorbachev's retreat from Eastern Europe to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Of course, my personal perspective as a witness, and in many cases, a participant in these events that took place in the last 25 years. And the role of the free world, of the West. What the West did, or to be more precise, didn't do to prevent it from happening. There are many stories in this book. And hopefully you can read and enjoy, because it's an attempt to actually bring together my own experience and observations over the last 25 plus years from Gorbachev's era to these days. And it's not just an analysis like in a game of chess. So we just looked at the moves we made and we found what was right, what was wrong. It's more like a preparation for the future. Of course, I'm retired. I have not played professional chess since 2005, but my chess skills, my chess abilities still with me. And I hope that this analysis could help people to understand what kind of mistakes were made in this process. Since I'm introduced partially as a chess grandmaster, so I will be using heavily chess metaphors. Though sometimes I feel uncomfortable when I hear phrases like Putin plays chess while Obama is playing checkers. It's even considering the fact that Putin has been steadily outplaying Obama and other leaders of the free world, I have to defend the integrity of my game. Because when you say playing chess, you assume that it's a strategic game and you have all information in front of you. Chess is a transparent game. Everything is you know what are the opponent's resources. You don't know his or her thoughts, but at least what kind of resources he or she can use to cause damage to your position. I think the parallel is this metaphor is not most appropriate because dictators, they don't play chess. Dictatorship is non-transparent by its nature. Dictators play poker. Why I think poker parallel is more appropriate? Because in poker you can have a weak hand, but you can have strong will. In this case, political will. And you can bluff. And you can win the game, even with pair of 5 against a full house. If your opponent is not ready to raise the stakes, and he is scared by your bluff, and he falls out the cards. And that's what happened actually, many times in the past few years. And I'll try to explain why Putin has been playing this game and what to expect from his strategy, if you may call it strategy, of raising stakes. Going back to chess, here I would like to use chess metaphor to differentiate between strategy and tactics. And I believe that could tell you could give you a good picture to see the differences between dictatorships, non-democratic regimes, and democracies. Dictators always feel more comfortable in very sharp, complicated tactical positions where anything can change with one move. Boom. So its position is chaotic. The material balance is broken. So you don't operate with long-term plans. It's all about one good move. So you have to react very quickly. And of course, dictator has an advantage. You may call it even a strategic advantage over any leader of the free world. He doesn't have to go to the parliament. He doesn't care about the press, public opinion, so he makes a decision. On the other side, democratic society has an advantage in its lasting institutions. It can work out a strategic plan. Because even if government changes, so institutions are still there, and most likely they will continue, maybe with some alterations, but the same policy. Domestically there are more changes, but foreign policy often, stays within the range. Though unfortunately it didn't work this way in this country. While American foreign policy was quite steady from the end of the World War II to the end of the Cold War, from Harry Truman to Bush 41, and the next three presidents, changed it in a form of pendulum. It was swinging from one side to another. Clinton did very little, Bush did too much, Bush 43. Obama has been doing nothing, so it goes, from one side to another, which, by the way, has serious consequences in diminishing sort of American image worldwide, because what to expect? So people didn't know what to expect. In the book, I'm arguing that the great moment of 91, 92 has been missed to come up with new institutions, new ideas. America was all-powerful at that time. Probably many of you don't remember that. Many of you probably don't remember the Soviet Union. As at the end of the World War II, it was instrumental to come up with a new game plan. And the administration of Harry Truman did a great job, which I believe is still, underestimated, because the task they faced was gigantic, Herculean task. Yesterday, I have to share my emotions. I spent a few hours in Truman's library, and it's one of my favorite presidents, and I could see and hear his voice and see the documents, and just to again understand, how important it was at that time to build these new institutions. These institutions helped America and the free world to survive against the communist onslaught and eventually to win the Cold War. And there are many of them: National Security Council, CIA, NATO, Voice of America, changed from just the sort of small government outlet into the massive propaganda machine to confront communist propaganda in Europe. So it was at a moment where America has been facing much more formidable foe than Vladimir Putin. When I hear today's stories, how can you confront Putin? He's so powerful. Really? More powerful than Joseph Stalin in 1948. Seriously, are you kidding me? When Stalin, decided to swallow West Berlin and announced the blockade, and American planes for 11 months has been bringing food and everything that was needed, and Stalin hasn't shot a single plane. Why? Because dictators who were staying in power for so long, they have a natural animal instinct. They could smell. If they smell blood, they go for a kill. If they smell strength, they back off. That's why they stay in power for so long. And Stalin knew that Truman was the man who would act. So, and of course, we can look, these other events of the Cold War. But what was very important, the administrations, one after another, again, with all the differences between Democrats and Republicans, they agreed on sort of fundamentals. They knew there was an existential threat from the Soviet Union, from communism. They knew, that they had to confront it. And again, while there were changes and alterations, always within the range. I recently watched again the televised debate, first televised debate between Nixon and Kennedy, before I was born in 1960. It's just when everybody's watching debates today, I can recommend if you have an hour, okay, you don't have to watch all four, but just to spare, just watch one to see the civility and the quality of the debate. But most important thing, it was not an agreement, but they always disagreed about the means, not about the goals. And to hear them repeatedly saying, I agree with what Senator Kennedy said, I agree with what Vice President Nixon said. I mean, just watching the debates today, you can hardly imagine. But there were two Americans there, very different. By the way, few understand that it was, I think, unless I'm dead wrong, it was the youngest pair in the presidential elections. Nixon 47, Kennedy 43. But it just tells you that, for decades there was this understanding that we need to have a plan, common strategy. And since 1991, 1992, it's changed to this pendulum momentum. The idea of having this book released by the end of this year, by the end of the fall, was to encourage this bipartisan debate again. Because I believe this is the way to move forward. And I remember when I walked into the office of the publisher with my longtime friend and an associate, Mick Ringert, co-author. So it was mid-January this year, mid-January, after holidays. And we met the publisher, and we presented them with an idea, said it's almost ready, so of course we need a few more months, and we would like the book to be published in October. They looked at us at October 2016. We said, no, October 2015, because it had an effect on the debates, on the campaign. They said, no, it's impossible. When are you going to produce us the book? At the end of April. We did it by May 1st. I said, but even if you produce the book, so we don't have time to publicize it. I told them, you didn't have to. Vladimir Putin will do it. I was not happy to just, to tell them that, but that's a fact. I said, Russia and what Vladimir Putin will be doing, will be on the front page all the time. They believed me. I mean, there was some kind of skepticism, but they just believed me. And now this is when we have just an opportunity for interview, because there's so many opportunities and so many offers, and they would like to grab it. I said, don't rush, because it's not going to change. So the same algorithm will continue. Putin will keep pushing. The book, for instance, doesn't talk about Syria. I didn't know the address, but I predicted it would strike. Why? Because that's what happened with all the dictators in the past. At first, dictator needs to solidify his power, and he needs friends, as Vladimir Putin did, by the way. We have to give credit for him and his propaganda machine for what they did in the first decade of first two Putin terms, from 2000 to 2008, by presenting Putin as one of the equals of the leaders of the free world. Even for Russians, even for those who had sympathy to our cause, it was very difficult to believe what Garry Kasparov, Boris Nemtsov, whoever, was speaking about Putin and the true nature of Putin's regime, while they could see a picture on television. Putin is hosting a G7, I never called it G8, because G7 stood for 7 great industrial democracies, and I said it's 7+1, because Russia didn't qualify in my mind to be a great industrial democracy. But anyway, call it G8 if you want. And there's a picture, St. Petersburg, and Putin is surrounded by Bush, 43, Blair, Berlusconi, Chirac, I think Merkel already was at that time there, before it was Schroeder, Harper. So would you believe a couple of, guys, good guys, sincere guys, but they're shouting in the desert while we see this picture. So either Putin is a Democrat, or democracy is just, is just a bargaining chip. Nobody cares about it. By the way, that's what Putin propaganda carefully, explained to the Russian public. It's all okay. Maybe we're not great, but others are the same. And it worked. But, eventually, this phase is over, and dictator who runs out of enemies inside his own country, he will be looking for enemies elsewhere. Now, in Russia, unfortunately, Putin had an opportunity to win 4 more years. By having, you remember the name? Medvedev. I also have to give him credit, because, it's Putin said, after being appointed prime minister in 1999, visiting his former colleagues in Lubyanka squares in KGB, he said, once KGB, always KGB. And why not to listen to what he said? And he proved that he was a good KGB. Though he was not very successful, but deep down, he was a good agent, because he could read the minds of both Western leaders quite successfully, yes, telling them the stories. You remember Bush 43 looking in his eyes and saying, I saw his soul, and I can do business with him. And my reaction was, you don't have to look at his eyes. You're not a shrink. Look at his record. And because Putin told him a story about, him being baptized, hidden cross in his childhood. And of course, yeah, Bush couldn't help but crying. Putin needed this 4 years because he was not ready at that time to grab power for 4 more years. It's just to go against Russian constitution. Yeltsin was only two terms. And he found a person who could spend 4 years in the chair. And in Russia we say that the chair gives someone a lot of power, the presidential chair. It's almost, the power almost immense. The prime minister the president can fire prime minister with a stroke of his pen. Medvedev didn't do it. Because even if he had these tiny ambitions, multiplied by the power of the chair, he could do everything. But no matter how big is a magnifying power, 1 million, 1 billion, anything multiplied by 0 turns into 0. And Putin could find one person, probably either the only one in his entourage, who could stay there 4 years, did nothing except, adding 2 more years for a next term. But okay, forget Medvedev. It's for me and for all my friends in Russia, it was just a very simple game, another KGB operation, a cover-up operation. But I couldn't believe when I saw Americans or Europeans trying to throw their power, their weight behind Medvedev. Let's make him an alternative to Putin. Medvedev. But that was a policy. And and it brings me back, to the old days, because in 1990s, that's one of my first visits to this country, and I did, a few appearances. First I appeared, before the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. They recorded conversation with me, and then somehow, I was invited to the White House to see American policymakers. National Security Council, head of National Security Council, General Scowcroft, and the head of the Soviet desk at that time, a rising star of foreign policy in this country, Condoleezza Rice. And they wanted to hear my opinion about Gorbachev and about Yeltsin and about Soviet Union. And the conversation was, quite disappointing for both sides. They asked me about Gorbachev, and I said Gorbachev's star was going down. It will not last for too long. Soviet Union didn't look healthy to me, so I thought the end was imminent. They couldn't believe me. And then they asked me, just to understand exactly what I said, about Yeltsin. And I said, now it's March 1990, 2 more months. Yeltsin would be elected, it was the position, the chairman of the Supreme Soviet of Russian Parliament of the Russian Federation. They were shocked. They said, Yeltsin, he's a drunk and he's a loose cannon. I looked at them. I also asked, do you want to hear from me just his comments on his character or his political future? And as I said, it was quite disappointing because they believed I was an idiot. And I grew up in the Soviet Union, not, that I believed Soviet propaganda. I could see through it. And I realized, that this, and you can read it also in the book, that the system was a dead end. And after I won my world title in 1985, 30 years ago, I joined the what was at that time democratic movement. But we all believed that here in America, in Washington, in Langley, in Pentagon, they definitely knew something about Soviet Union. And just for them being so naive, that was quite shocking. And I also remember in November 1991, I was in DC receiving a human rights award. And at the same day, Edward Shevardnadze, who was just reappointed the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, he was received very pompously, pompous reception in the White House. Bush 41, Jim Baker III, his Secretary of State, celebrating a new dawn in Soviet-American relations, 5 weeks before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So let's say they didn't know, they didn't understand, they grew up during the Cold War and they couldn't imagine the Soviet Union could be gone one day. But in 2009, just to believe that Medvedev could be an alternative, and by the way, it was already after Putin's invasion, technically I say Medvedev's invasion, but it was Putin's, Russia's invasion of the tiny Republic of Georgia. And to offer in exchange a new sunshine policy, the infamous reset button, which, by the way, was a big mistake. If for those who speak Russian, they know that this was not a reset in Russian, but as it was written on the button, but overweight or overcharged. So, and for years they played this game. For years they played this game. It was simply for me just a signal that they didn't understand the nature of the regime. Putin came back in 2012, as expected, because he had no other plans but to stay in power. And at that time, it became apparent even for Russian public, and there were many demonstrations in 2011, early 2012. But there was not enough power to actually change the course of the country, because many people in Russia, they just believed that Putin was so lucky that even with all the difficulties and just the temporary difficulties, he will eventually prevail. And this belief in the lucky star of a dictator is still very much alive. And that explains why many Russians, they're not, while being not happy at all with all the changes, with economic situation, they feel that it will be too risky and too unwise to rise against the dictator. And again, Putin reached a point where he needed enemies because, since the economy was not in good shape, every dictator needs a rationale, a myth. Why he's staying in power? Already 15 years. And his intentions are very clear. He'll stay for the rest of his life. Okay, nobody knows how long will it take, neither us nor him. But he's not going to walk away from Kremlin on his own. Every dictator, eventually comes up with this propaganda machine, throwing all these fireballs to the public, telling that our country is in danger, is a grave danger, and only this man, the White Knight, the Vladimir, the Invincible, the whatever, the most powerful, could protect us against all the enemies. My mother is 78. She still lives in Moscow, and she was born under Stalin, as you can calculate. And she saw all stages of Soviet propaganda. And she keeps telling me that while it was really difficult in the Soviet time, and people could be swayed by the propaganda, which was tough, but of course not as powerful as today. Not the same technical devices were available, but it always contains some elements some positive elements, something about bright future. So we have to make sacrifices now because in the future we will have this communist brotherhood and people will have happy life. And Putin's propaganda eliminated anything positive. It's all about conflict. It's about war. It's about destruction. It's poisonous. It's oral in its purest form. Slavery is freedom. War is peace. It's 100% lie. It's a virtual reality. But this virtual reality, has an effect. It's very difficult actually to leave this virtual reality if you are attacked by this on 24/7 basis. Again, I know it from my mother and from other relatives. Okay, they're immune, but already their friends, they're struggling. And Putin knows the power of this propaganda. It's important that people see that he is strong. Not only people on the street, not only the middle class in Moscow or other big cities, but also the elite. Again, how can you go against someone who's so powerful, so lucky, that he can do whatever? So he can take over Crimea without a single shot. He can challenge and defy most powerful politicians in the world. And one of I believe, the best elements of this propaganda was Putin's trip to New York at the end of September this year, to the General Assembly of the United Nations. He showed up there, and everybody expected him to say something big. And the Wall Street Journal asked me to write an editorial about the speech. And I told him I could submit my editorial before he spoke. Because I said it would be obvious that the speech for him was just a smoke screen. It doesn't matter what he's going to say there, because he will act anyway. Unfortunately, it didn't matter what Obama was going to say, because we knew he would not act. Putin showed up, delivered a speech, a long one, but again, Who cares? There were so many dictators at the UN platform that day or day before, day after. So unfortunately, it's United Nations turned into this, a great display of various dictators who know how to use this platform for their benefits. Obama also said something, which I can nobody remember what he said, because we all know it was irrelevant. And then they met. You remember the meeting? A very short meeting. They discussed something which, again, for Putin, nothing mattered except the meeting. You remember the reluctant handshake? That's Putin-Obama? I bet you Putin spent hours in front of the mirror practicing this. It's, you think it's irrelevant, okay, one handshake. But this is the image, and the picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, Putin had both the picture and the 1,000 words. On Russian television, it was presented as Vladimir Putin. He had to go to New York, to the belly of the beast, to meet Obama, but it's the United Nations, President of the United States. He had to shake his hand. Next day, Russian planes bombed American-backed opposition in Syria. So you can understand what kind of image is created in the minds of ordinary Russians. So they could see Putin is sending military jets and advisors to Syria. Iran has been sending troops and ammunition. Obama sends John Kerry. So who's calling the shots? Now, eventually, Obama sent 50 special ops troops. 50. There are more Russian TV crews in Syria. While predicting next moves, again, we should remember, he needs conflict, he needs chaos, because chaos helps him to rule Russia and also to boost his foreign credentials. Next step, whatever, but there's so many opportunities in the Middle East for him to create new wars. Because on one side you have Israel, not far away from the actual war zone, and for how long Israel could stay away, if being provoked, nobody knows. On the other side, you have Saudi Arabia not far away. And let's not forget, ISIS, Islamic State, they're Sunnis. They failed to make advance against Shia on the Shia side of Iraq. They failed to make a big advance in the north against Kurds, but they could go against the same Sunnis in the south. And at the moment Saudi Arabia blows up, oil price goes up also, dramatically. And that's what Putin needs. He desperately needs money now. With $50 a barrel, roughly $50 a barrel, he has resources, by most optimistic from his perspective calculation, for 2 years. But interestingly enough, even having this first time during his 15 years in power, a relative shortage of cash, his budget demonstrates his priorities. He keeps cutting on all expenses like social security, healthcare, education, but he keeps investing, putting up more money, military, security apparatus, and propaganda. This is the war budget. That there should be no more doubts about his intentions. And for those who are desperately looking for common ground with him, you should understand that while America, as the most globalized economy, needs just global security to make sure that the business goes well, and the international trade and finances they are intact, Putin needs exactly the opposite. He has nothing to offer but the conflict. And throughout these conflicts, he can reach his goals. And his main goal is, of course, to stay in power for the rest of his life. Now, I'm sure there will be many questions, so that's why I'm wrapping it off. And just to be a little bit more optimistic, because it's winter is coming. It's coming actually. It's November. Yeah. And by the way, it's when people ask me about the title, of course, because I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones, and I even read the books. Yeah, yes. And the winter is coming. I thought it was a perfect title because it's about dark and dangerous times ahead of us, and that's exactly my warning. So I'm a weatherman. So just you should accept this weather forecast because I believe is accurate. But it also tells you that the history is not linear, it goes in cycles. Now we are just entering a new cycle, but as in the book, this is not necessarily a climate only. It's not just weather, but it's something else which we could make shorter or longer, depending on our active stand or our, of our inability to defend ourselves against these new dangers. So that's why we can definitely cut this period shorter. And just as a positive note, so I'm in this book tour. I have my son, who lives in Moscow. He's 19, just it's about your age. He travels with me, and we were in Kansas City yesterday, and we saw the pictures of the locals celebrating the triumphs of the Royals. About 1 million people in downtown Kansas City, and Vadim said, hopefully, one day we'll see this spontaneous demonstration in the Red Square, and that will mark the end of the regime. So we probably should share the same, philosophy as Chicago Cubs. So always next year. Okay. Go ahead.
So I'm long the time of your fan. I've been in your match with Karpov in 1984 in Moscow. But so one thing that you said recently, that only Marco Rubio can deal, if I understand correctly from internet, can deal with Putin. Do you really believe that Hillary Clinton, for example, because of her reset button before, cannot deal with Putin?
Let's be very just clear. I'm not an American citizen. I'm not going to vote. So I'm trying to sort of disassociate myself from the domestic issues because it's none of my business. But I do care about U.S. foreign policy because I believe it will have decisive effect in the global climate, geopolitical climate. I have been asked repeatedly about Republican candidates, and I just have been listening to them. I can tell you exactly who cannot deal with Putin, and you can guess the name. They're 5 letters. Yes, it's like Voldemort. Don't pronounce it. So I even, just once, because I've been terrorized. Oh, what about this man? And I said, he's like cotton candy candidate. Just at first it tastes good, no nutrition value, and too much makes you sick. I heard all of them speaking, and I believe that Rubio, because of his Cuban roots, he understands what is communism, what is dictatorship, what is KGB. And I think it's important he believes in what he's saying. I remember 4 years ago, Mitt Romney made a correct statement about Russia being #1 geopolitical foe, and Obama trashed him in the debates. And Romney couldn't even respond because for him it was a soundbite. I want a candidate to believe and to understand what he's saying, and it seems to me that on that stage, he's definitely, Rubio looks for me as the most appropriate candidate to take the strong stand against Putin. He just called him a gangster in charge of the, $2 trillion criminal empire. That's a good start. Now, as for the Democratic side, so yes, naturally Hillary will have major problems because of this reset policy. But at the end of the day, I'm sure, if she's nominated, okay, if probably is an exaggeration. She could be even more hawkish than the Republican because she'll have to restore her credentials. My goal, as I said it in the book, and I keep saying in my appearances, is to encourage this debate. That's why I mentioned Nixon Kennedy, where they agree on the strategy and will disagree on the means. So it's very important that America will recognize there are threats, because if the pendulum continues swinging from one side to another, it could be disastrous. So I'll be delighted to see Rubio-Clinton debates because with all the reservations about her previous positions, Hillary Clinton, she definitely understands who is Vladimir Putin. And I can tell you that, for instance, in Europe, I always say that there's only one politician with balls, Angela Merkel. Should I conduct it, or just okay? I'm here. Just let's go to a student.
Hi, Mr. Kasparov. Even though the U.S. and Russia are kind of engaging in a proxy conflict in Syria, how should the U.S. cooperate with Russia to go work with global issues like climate change and famine and poverty, even though they're engaging in conflict in other proxy nations?
I think you just don't understand. This is not a conflict in Syria. It's a conflict in values. You cannot cooperate with Vladimir Putin because his goals are very different. He may find a little piece of common ground to advance his agenda, but he is not a friend. He is not an ally. He is an enemy. He is a dedicated enemy of the free world, and any attempt to ignore this fact will lead to another disaster. The longer Putin stays in power, greater the risk of a global disaster. It's desperate attempts. How we can work with Russia? It's the best way you can do, because, by the way, let's make very clear. You're talking about Putin, and Putin's interests and Russian interests are not the same. Dictator pretends he is the country. Hitler believed he was Germany, Stalin believed he was Soviet Union, Mao Zedong believed he was China, Putin believed he is Russia. He's not. He has been sacrificing Russian strategic interests for his very temporary gains. What the hell are Russian troops doing in Syria these days? Who blew up a Russian airliner with 224 of my competitors on board? And by the way, after Russian missile hit and brought down MH17 Malaysian airliner, Putin, there was no single Russian citizen there. It was not a Russian territory. But Putin immediately called all the world leaders, and within 7 hours, he already made his TV appearances. After this disaster, tragedy in the skies of Egypt, he was silent for 55 hours. Just to give you an idea, that it's how he values the human lives and what is his agenda. He has been looking and still looking for an opportunity to turn it against his true enemies. And his number one enemy is the United States of America. Russian television already a few days ago, it hasn't blamed America directly, but the way it was presented in Russian is basically think addressing Russian public. Why terrorists attacked Russian, not American plane? And it's the whole story was an implication that America always liked and always backed terrorists if they were attacking Russian interests. Vladimir Putin is an enemy of Russian people and of the civilized world. And as every dictator, longer he stays in power, drier the desert he creates. And that's why the outcome of his demise, would be disastrous, but from history we know. Sooner it happens, better the chance for my country and for the world to go through this turmoil. Because every extra year he stays in power, will not help us to find solutions to the problems that you mentioned, and they're real problems. But you need a democratic Russia to be a partner in solving these problems, not a dictator who thinks only about his own survival. Okay, let's move to this side. The mic is behind you.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Thanks. In the book, you call for this principle-based U.S. foreign policy, not only embracing democracy, but embracing modernity. Putin is not Hitler, but Putin is pure evil, and as an Obama voter, I realize, okay, I was wrong. You're right, okay. However, and this is a friendly critique, our allies are the Saudis. They are not advancing modernity. Our dear allies, the Israelis, the one true democracy in the Mideast, also has this faction which is very distressing right now and doing some very distressing things in the world. How do we, as Americans, conduct a principle-based foreign policy without some realpolitik?
I'm a little bit troubled by I'm sure it's subconsciously putting Saudi Arabia and Israel on one line. So Saudi Arabia is okay. It's not a democracy. And as the chairman of Human Rights Foundation, I heavily criticize Saudi Arabia many times. You can read my Twitter, my Facebook. Our organization every year organizes the biggest dissident gathering in the world called Oslo Freedom Forum. And I followed Václav Havel, just late Václav Havel, who was the chairman of Human Rights Foundation. And every year we give an award, Václav Havel Award for Creative Dissent. One of the first, in the first year, that's 3 years ago, the recipient was Manan al-Sharif, the woman from Saudi Arabia who was driving and making a video. So I have no doubts about the true colors of this regime. Now, as for Israel, yes, there are troubling people there, but it's a democracy. There are many troubling people in this country also. Yes, both on the right and on the left. So that's why, again, it's just the good thing that democracy always keeps the balance. And Israel, unfortunately, is the only democracy in the region. It always makes it a target. Now, there was a moment, and in the book I specifically said it, in 91, 92, actually during probably the first Clinton term, there were many opportunities to advance this agenda. And this is not people say neocon agenda. It's a neocon agenda as well as an agenda of Harry Truman and J.F. Kennedy. So many American presidents had dreams about creating this, a kind of a League of Nations based on human rights and respect for democracy, not just, United Nations that was built to freeze conflicts, which was important at that time. Nobody doubts it, but not to offer solutions. It's far more complicated these days. But I think again, it's a scene. I won't say a red line. That's definitely wrong. Yes, but it's a very delicate balance, and again, you can try to move your agenda, as by the way many American presidents, from Truman to Reagan did, allying with certain forces that are not ideal, but let's not forget, against Hitler, this country and British Empire allied with Stalin. So not that I'm advocating, this kind of alliance these days, but there's no Stalin, thanks God. Not that Putin is better, but he doesn't have the same power. So that's because let's not forget, Russia today is a pale shadow of the Soviet Union, economically, militarily. There's still nukes, but it's not the same ideological enemy that threatened the very existence of the Western civilization. And I think that is, while U.S. administration can work out, I think it is balanced by laying down the long-term plan. Because if the United States demonstrates its adherence to these principles, I think it can put pressure on any country, including Saudi Arabia. It's just it's about political will, because yes, America depends on Saudis, but Saudis depend on America. And you can do many things in the region if you demonstrate your commitment. And its commitment is not just, building the states. It's about state building, which, was a failure because many states, as we understand, have been built after World War I, and the borders, they're quite questionable. So the Middle East borders, as in many borders in African countries, they have been made by the colonial administrations, and they did not reflect, and they still do not reflect, ethnic and religious differences. So the strategy is actually to come up with a plan. I mean, just to find a solution for the region, not necessarily based on the status quo that is dead. And that's what I believe should be done. And in parallel, you can do a lot of things by pressing, countries like Saudi Arabia, even China. But you need a political will. You have to demonstrate your engagement, because this engagement these days is a lose-lose proposition. Two giant oceans don't protect America against all the threats. Terrorists, if they want to go after Americans, they don't care whether they're Republicans or Democrats. It's not about red or blue. It's about those who are carrying blue passports. So I think that it's important that we will have this bipartisan call for this a new foreign policy based on the principles that helped us to win Cold War. Okay, move on.
What danger is there to being an outspoken opponent of Putin in Russia, and how do you navigate it?
I navigated by leaving Russia. And I think this question is a bit outdated after my dear friend and colleague and ally, long-term ally Boris Nemtsov was gunned down in front of the Kremlin last February. And for me, it was even more tragic than for many others because he told me to get out of the country in March 2013 when I was summoned to give an interview to an investigative committee, and they wanted to find out about political activities of our groups. It eventually ended up with a big trial. And many of my former colleagues ended up behind bars. And Boris told me plainly, you enter the building as a witness, and if you leave the building, you'll be a suspect. So stay away. But unfortunately, he was too brave and too proud to leave Russia, and he has been blasting Putin to the last day of his life. His last interview where he criticized Yeltsin for appointing Putin, because we know Boris at one point was many believe Yeltsin's potential successor. He was a former deputy prime minister, and it's so painful to think what could be Russia if Yeltsin picked up Nemtsov, not a former KGB, who is always KGB, as we know. And he stayed there. And just an hour before he was killed, he spoke about Yeltsin and Putin and about the future of Russia. I wish he could follow his own advice and be here with us to keep fighting, because the regime sent a message, and many people ask me, but why Nemtsov was not dangerous? He was not running for the office. Who was Nemtsov? He was a former deputy prime minister, but irrelevant. Because the mistake is if you try to apply the rules and the customs of the democratic society, and somebody who is not running, who is a former politician, he is not dangerous. He's not a political opponent anymore. In mafia state, it's the boss, must be shielded from any criticism. And at one point, he has to silence everybody who is going after him. And Boris Nemtsov had an imposing presence and a very loud voice. And he paid an ultimate price. Rest in peace. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Kasparov. So you mentioned how history is cyclical, obviously, and I think both of us are very aware of the cycles in Russian history and how all that works. So my question is it possible for Russia to transition to a democratic society without the catastrophes that we've seen in the past whenever there is a major change of government?
Look, if we hope for a transition, the major change is inevitable. Not the major change. That was a cleansing operation. That was the biggest mistake made in 1991. You saw the recent action of very brave, artists who just burned the door of the KGB in Lubyanka. Okay, kudos to him. We had to do it 24 years ago. Burn down this building. And then there would be no Putin. It was a mistake, just to concentrate on the statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky. Everybody celebrated. Nobody could believe that, the Soviet Union, the ghosts of the past, could actually come back. People always looking for smooth paths, but unfortunately, 74 years of the communist dictatorship, they created unbearable situation, and without drastic measures, we will fail. We know that. We know it now. So the next term of Russian history, we have to make sure that there will be new people, new faces. And when somebody says, "Oh, you have to replace the entire Russian bureaucracy," yes. How many people? 50,000 people? Are you telling me that Putin, Sechin, and I can start counting these names, this is the best Russia can do? We have so many Russians just who grew up, in foreign countries, that had education in foreign universities. Many of them, are still coming back and forth. So I believe Russia, 140 million people, I'm sure there's enough potential, just to replace this corrupt class and just to have new, modern, young bureaucracy, that will be a part of this global modernity. It's unfortunately it's not going to happen overnight because, as I said, dictator stayed in power for too long, which means he had been steadily eliminating all the opposition. And next day, when Putin goes down, and it's again the bad news, I don't know when. The good news, he doesn't know. It will be a turmoil. And Russia may not survive as a state on the map. We have a huge pressure from China, and if I told you about Putin and Obama, but you should look, if you want to compare body language, you should look at Putin and Chinese. Very different language. So as you can see that he acts like a subordinate because he knows that they will not be listening to all this nonsense, and they know this game with these pictures, and so China has been gradually, taking over in the Far East and the Middle and Russian Eastern Siberia. I remember 10 years ago, I had been traveling from Vladivostok to Irkutsk, visiting different Russian regions there, and I heard this very, very sad joke that Chinese has been crossing our borders in very small groups, 100,000 each. And also radical Islam. So it's the most powerful army probably in Russia today is Ramzan Kadyrov, the warlord in Chechnya. And the Islamic radicals, they feel very comfortable in the northern Caucasus and basically in the southern part of Russia. What happens in case of the turmoil? God knows. They could raise the green flag, the black flag. So everybody will play his own game. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to spend, your efforts, your resources to prop up Putin's regime, because, today the price is high and it looks costly and dangerous. Tomorrow it goes up, and in 2 days it could be simply unbearable. So that's why, again, confronting him today offers us better chances to see that Russia will be eventually joining the family of civilized nations.
We have time for one last question.
I'm looking actually. No female, so that's why I'm sorry. Go ahead. Just look for a girl.
So you say that the winter is coming, but
it's not. I didn't say that.
I
borrowed it.
But in a world where both the U.S. and Russia have nuclear capabilities, what do you see that winter being?
Look, it's a serious question because I understand the parallels with this radioactive winter, which could be a result, most likely a result of the nuclear Armageddon. But we are at the stage now. Where I think the nuclear threat is not a looming threat as was in 1962. Now, the reason I believe that Putin must be confronted today and not to wait any longer, because what happens with every dictator who is lucky and who seems to be lucky by his inner circle and who can win all these battles, even virtual battles, that you are gradually losing a chance to inspire rebellion from inside. That's what happened in the 30s. If you read Winston Churchill, I think he firstly spoke about it here in the United States in the speech mid-October 1938, when he spoke about missed opportunity to provoke German generals and some industrials who recognized that Führer was paranoid, to rise against him in case of the war with Czechoslovakia and Britain and France. I think it's, again, that's kind of the historical rule that could be applied to every dictatorship. You should not miss the moment where this rebellion is still possible. And you have to demonstrate that dictator is kind of, he's isolated. You have to try to isolate. It's a surgical operation. This is to send the right message to Russian oligarchs, to Russian elite, to middle class in Moscow. I say Moscow because Putin created the state where anything outside of Moscow is irrelevant. Simply, even St. Petersburg now is a political province. It's the real protest that could threaten Putin is in Moscow or nowhere. But these people today, when you just follow Russian propaganda, and I'm not even talking about Channel 1, Channel 2, Channel 3, but also more sophisticated publications, like Rosbusiness Consulting website for advanced audience. It always creates an impression, and even without lying, for instance, Europe is divided on the issue of sanctions, which it is. Europe is divided. Angela Merkel is facing challenge from inside her own government. She is facing this challenge from social democrats who control foreign office. And it creates an illusion that Putin is still in charge, very much in charge. And all these difficulties are temporary. Russian public doesn't understand Crimea as a prize. Yes, there's sanctions. But at the end of the day, okay, if Putin won before, why not to expect him to prevail again? And for Russian oligarchs, for Russian elite, yes, sanctions, they're causing inconvenience. But as long as oligarchs could, who banned from visiting abroad, could rely on their families, their wives and brothers, to run their fortunes from Switzerland, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, the United Kingdom, they don't care. Inconvenience is not a strong incentive to challenge a brutal dictator. Create incentives. Make sure that Russian public, these relevant groups that I described, understand the cost of supporting Putin or the cost of not rising against him, because the protraction of his agony in power will eventually hurt them. It's not easy, and nobody's telling you it's easy. But I think it's doable. And again, we should remember that the longer he stays, more paranoid he gets, and it's more difficult to expect anybody to stop him if at one day, being surrounded in Kremlin, he will not push the button. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Mr. President.